On a snowy Christmas Eve in 1945, a peaceful night turned into a lifetime of unanswered questions. A house fire consumed the Sauter family home, but 5 of the 10 children inside were never found. No remains. No evidence. Just smoke, ash, and silence. What began as a tragedy quickly spiraled into a mystery filled with strange sightings, missing evidence, and decades of desperate searching. Did the children die, or were they taken? Nestled in the remote Bavarian countryside of Germany stood a small farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. It was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and half a mile away from its nearest neighbor. In March of 1922, this peaceful farm would become the site of one of Germany's most gruesome and perplexing unsolved crimes. The Gruber family, who had lived on the property for years, were all found brutally murdered, their lives snuffed out by a killer who may have been closer than anyone imagined. Andreas Gruber, the family patriarch, was known to be a stern and sometimes unpleasant man. He lived with his wife, Casilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Casilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living with them was their maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived on the day of the murders. The events began quietly, with oddities that most people might dismiss as nothing more than miscommunications or small coincidences. But in retrospect, those small signs hinted at something far more sinister. A few days before the murders, Andreas told neighbors and friends of strange occurrences on the farm. He had found unfamiliar footprints in the snow leading from the forest toward the farmhouse, but none leading back. He also mentioned that keys had gone missing and that he had heard footsteps in the attic. Perhaps most eerily, he discovered a newspaper on the porch that no one in the household claimed to have purchased. Though disturbed, Andreas did not report the events to the authorities. Instead, he kept quiet, a decision that may have cost him and his family their lives. On the evening of March 31, 1922, the killer made their move. One by one, members of the Gruber household were lured into the barn. It is believed they were attacked with a mattock, a tool resembling a pickaxe, as each person entered. Andreas was first, then his wife, followed by Victoria and young Casilia. The child reportedly stayed alive the longest. Her fingers were torn and bloodied, likely from pulling out her own hair in terror before succumbing to her wounds. After murdering the 4 in the barn, the killer moved into the house. There, they killed the maid, Maria, in her bed. Lastly, little Joseph was murdered in his crib, a blanket covering his tiny form before the final blow was dealt. It was not until 4 days later, on April 4th, that neighbors began to suspect something was wrong. The family had not been seen in days. Young Casilia had missed school. The mailman noticed newspapers piling up. Concerned, several locals visited the farm. Upon entering the barn, they were met with a horrific sight. 4 bodies stacked atop each other, partially covered with hay. The authorities were called, and further searching led to the discovery of the remaining 2 victims inside the home. What investigators found next was perhaps the most chilling part of the case. Someone had been living in the house after the murders. The livestock had been fed. The fireplace was recently used. Meals had been eaten. Whoever had committed the murders had remained on the property for days, existing among the dead. And then, just as silently as they had come, they disappeared. The investigation turned up few clues. The murder weapon was eventually discovered hidden in the attic, the very place Andreas had heard footsteps days earlier. Yet the killer left behind no fingerprints, and the family's valuables remained untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Suspicion fell on several individuals. Victoria was rumored to have been involved in an incestuous relationship with her father, Andreas. Some believed Joseph was the product of that relationship, while others suspected Victoria had a secret lover, possibly the father of her child, who might have had a motive for revenge. One suspect, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, was Victoria's former suitor. He had once claimed to be Joseph's father and had argued with Andreas over child support. It was Lorenz who first entered the farm during the search and was oddly comfortable handling the bodies, leading some to suspect he already knew what he'd find. Despite the suspicion, there was never enough evidence to charge him or anyone else. Years passed. In the decades following the murders, the case remained cold. In 1923, the farm was demolished. During demolition, investigators discovered a hidden compartment in the barn, a place from which one could observe the farm unnoticed. It lent credence to the theory that the killer may have been hiding and watching the family long before the murders. Multiple investigations were launched over the years, including a modern re-examination in 2007. Forensic students used contemporary profiling methods to analyze the case and concluded that it was likely a single perpetrator who had personal motives. But the identity of the killer remained elusive. Today, the Hinterkaifeck murders are still regarded as one of Germany's most bizarre and terrifying unsolved crimes. A memorial now stands where the farmhouse once did, honoring the lives lost. The story has inspired books, documentaries, and endless speculation. Yet no theory has ever brought justice to the victims. It is as though the forest itself swallowed the truth, leaving only whispers in the wind and footprints in the snow. Footprints that led in, but never back out. On a cold February day in 1957, a young man walking through the woods near Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia came across a small cardboard box. Inside it lay the body of a boy, no older than 4 or 5 years old. He was naked, malnourished, and covered with small bruises and scars. His hair had been crudely chopped, his fingernails trimmed short, and his hands and feet appeared washed. He was wrapped in a plaid blanket and left in a JCPenney bassinet box. That single horrifying discovery would become one of America's longest-running and most haunting mysteries, the case of the boy in the box, also known as America's Unknown Child. The police were called, and the body was taken to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner. An autopsy revealed that the boy had suffered extensive physical abuse. There were signs of head trauma, likely the cause of death, along with old and new bruises, and healed fractures that suggested prolonged mistreatment. But what troubled investigators most was that no one came forward. No missing child reports matched the boy's description. No family claimed him. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost child. The box he was found in had once contained a bassinet sold by JCPenney. Investigators tracked every purchase of that bassinet in the region, but none led to a viable suspect. Flyers with the boy's face, or at least a drawing of it, were posted all over Philadelphia. The boy's body was photographed dressed and propped up as though still alive, and the image was circulated in newspapers, gas bills, post offices, anywhere someone might recognize him. Still, nothing. No name. No leads. Just silence. One early theory was that the boy had come from a local foster home. It was situated less than 2 miles from where the body was found, and run by a man known to be strict and abusive. Investigators visited the home, but the operator claimed that all children were accounted for. There was no warrant, no further action, and the lead was left unexplored. Years later, a retired detective would revisit the foster home and speak of a deep suspicion, one he could never confirm. Over time, the case attracted amateur sleuths and armchair detectives. One of the most persistent was Remington Bristow, an employee of the medical examiner's office. Bristow was so haunted by the boy's death that he spent decades of his life trying to solve the case. He hired a psychic who led him to the same foster home again. Bristow even attended estate sales and posed as a customer to search for evidence. Though his efforts added intrigue, they yielded no breakthroughs. In the 1990s, a new theory surfaced, one that would cast a dark shadow over the case. A woman, identified only as M, came forward claiming that her mother had purchased the boy on the black market, subjected him to abuse for years, and eventually killed him in a fit of rage when he vomited in the bathtub. M said she was forced to help her mother dispose of the body in the woods. Her account matched some details of the crime scene, the boy's nails being trimmed, his body washed, and the way he was wrapped in the blanket. However, when authorities tried to verify her story, it unraveled. No physical evidence linked her or her family to the crime. She had a history of mental illness, and though her story was compelling, it was ultimately deemed unreliable. Another promising lead faded into obscurity. As DNA technology advanced, hopes were rekindled. The boy's body was exhumed in 1998, and then again in 2019, for genetic testing. Genealogical databases, the same kind that helped identify the Golden State Killer, were employed to trace the boy's ancestry. In 2022, Nearly 65 years after the discovery, a breakthrough finally came. In December of 2022, authorities held a press conference. They had a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Born in 1953, Joseph was identified through DNA testing and genealogical research. His parents were both from the Philadelphia area, and though they were not named publicly, it was revealed that Joseph had siblings who were still alive. For the first time in decades, the boy in the box had an identity. He was no longer just a faceless victim. He had a history, a family, and a name etched into the records. Yet even this monumental discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why was he never reported missing? Who had custody of him? What kind of life had he lived, and how had he ended up dead, discarded like trash in a field? Detectives emphasized that Joseph's identification did not close the case. It opened a new chapter. Now that they knew who he was, they could begin to investigate the circumstances of his life and death. But with both parents deceased and the trail over 6 decades cold, the odds of a conviction remained slim. Despite the grim details, the story of Joseph Augustus Zarelli now holds a sliver of dignity. His tombstone, which for decades read "America's Unknown Child," has been updated with his true name. People still leave flowers and stuffed animals at his grave, now knowing whom they're honoring. The mystery of the boy in the box may never be fully solved. But in finally giving him back his name, investigators gave him something more powerful than justice. They gave him identity, and through that, a kind of immortality. On the morning of November 29, 1970, a man and his 2 young daughters were hiking in the Isdalen Valley, a quiet and somewhat eerie forested area outside of Bergen, Norway. Known locally as Death Valley, due to its history of suicides and tragic accidents, the area lived up to its grim nickname that day. As they climbed along the trail, they noticed a strange, burnt smell. When they looked closer, they found the source: the charred body of a woman, partially hidden among rocks and brush. The corpse was lying on its back, arms bent in an unnatural, almost theatrical pose, with a left hand clenched near the torso. The front of her body had suffered severe burns, yet the surroundings showed no sign of fire. Nearby lay a collection of odd objects: an empty bottle of St. Halvard liqueur, a packed lunch with a partially eaten sandwich, some plastic bottles, and fur-lined boots. The scene looked staged, almost ceremonial. But it was only the beginning of the bizarre and twisting case that would captivate Norway, and the world, for decades to come. The body was quickly taken to Bergen's Forensic Institute. An autopsy revealed that the woman had died from a combination of burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. She had also ingested over 50 sleeping pills. But the burns were peculiar. They were largely limited to the front of her body, and her clothes had been doused in gasoline before ignition. Even stranger, all labels from her clothing had been removed, and any identifying marks had been scrubbed clean. Her fingerprints had been sanded off. Within days, police found 2 suitcases at the Bergen railway station left in storage. They were traced back to the woman through fingerprints lifted from a pair of sunglasses inside, before authorities realized those prints matched the deceased. Inside the suitcases was a collection of wigs, various clothing styles, German and Norwegian currency, non-prescription glasses, maps, and cosmetics. Yet again, all identifying labels had been removed. Also inside was a coded list of locations and numbers, leading police to conclude that this woman had been involved in intelligence activity. The press dubbed her the Isdal Woman. No one came forward to claim her. No missing person reports matched her description. A sketch was circulated widely: a woman in her 30s or 40s, with long dark hair and sharp features, but no one recognized her. When authorities finally managed to trace some of her travel patterns, they uncovered something even more perplexing. She had checked into multiple hotels across Norway using different aliases. Over 9 separate identities were linked to her. At every hotel, she used false passports and spoke several languages, including German, French, Flemish, and English, with varying accents. Each time she checked in, she requested rooms with balconies or views, and always kept her luggage light. She never stayed longer than a few days, and often asked to switch rooms. One hotel employee described her as elegant and secretive, with a demeanor more aligned with a professional than a tourist. The Norwegian police soon began collaborating with Interpol, and rumors spread that she might be a spy, possibly from Israel's Mossad or the Soviet KGB. It was the Cold War era, and Norway, though neutral, was a strategic location for NATO. It was later discovered that she had traveled near several sensitive military installations, including missile testing sites. Her coded notes appeared to correlate with dates and locations of missile tests. That fact alone pushed the case deeper into the shadows of political intrigue. But the authorities never officially linked her to any intelligence agency. Eventually, the case was closed with the official conclusion that she had died by suicide. Yet many, including journalists, historians, and former investigators, remained unconvinced. Why would a woman planning suicide remove all identifying marks and use so many aliases? Why would she take great effort to avoid detection, travel with wigs, and speak in multiple languages? The more people asked, the deeper the mystery became. Decades passed, and the Istil woman case faded into urban legend. Then, in the 2000s, a renewed public interest, sparked by podcasts, documentaries, and online sleuthing, brought her story back into the spotlight. The Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, NRK, launched a new investigation in 2016. They managed to track down witnesses who hadn't spoken in over 40 years, including hotel workers, train conductors, and shopkeepers. Some recalled odd encounters with a woman, her wary glances, her nervous behavior, and her strange insistence on privacy. Most notably, NRK obtained a preserved sample of her jawbone. Using isotope analysis, scientists traced her origins to somewhere in southern or central Europe, likely near the border of France and Germany. This aligned with earlier reports of her speaking fluent French and broken German. They also used DNA phenotyping to reconstruct a likely facial image, sharper, more modern, and closer to her probable ancestry. Despite these advances, her true identity remains unknown. There are no public records that match her DNA, and none of her aliases led to a real person. Some believe she was a spy who became a liability. Others think she was a woman on the run from a dark past, her death the tragic climax of years spent hiding. There are even theories that she was killed as part of a ritual, or a secret criminal network. Over 50 years later, the Istil woman's story still captures the imagination. Her grave in Bergen's Melendal Cemetery bears a simple plaque, Ukjent Kvinn Funnet I Istelen November 29, 1970. Unknown woman found in Istelen, November 29, 1970. Visitors still leave flowers. She came from nowhere, used many names, and died in the shadows, a ghost slipping through Cold War Europe. In the end, the Istil woman remains an enigma, not quite a spy, not quite a victim, not quite forgotten. May 14, 2008, began as a typical spring evening in Marshall, Minnesota. For 19-year-old Brandon Swanson, it marked the end of his semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. He had just completed his final exams and decided to celebrate with friends. Brandon wasn't a drinker by habit, but there was a light, carefree energy in the air. Laughter, goodbyes, and summer promises. When he left a friend's house around midnight, no one could have imagined that Brandon would vanish into the darkness, sparking one of the most baffling missing person cases in the Midwest. Just after 1 a.m., Brandon's car veered into a ditch along a gravel road. He was unharmed, but stuck. He tried calling friends for help, but they couldn't locate him. Eventually, he called his parents. Calmly, he explained that he had gone off the road and needed a ride. His parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, immediately got into their truck and headed to where Brandon said he was, near the town of Lind, about 7 miles from their home in Marshall. But when they arrived at the location Brandon had given, they saw no sign of his car. They called him back. Frustrated but composed, Brandon said he could see lights in the distance. He believed they were from Lind, and decided to walk toward them. He told his father to meet him at the edge of town. While walking, Brandon remained on the phone with his dad for nearly 47 minutes. During this time, he narrated his movements, describing fences, gravel, and passing terrain. The conversation was steady, his voice unwavering. He didn't sound afraid. But then, suddenly, everything changed. That was the last thing Brandon Swanson ever said. The call went dead. His parents tried calling back immediately, but Brandon didn't answer. They kept calling through the night, more than 100 times, but it always went to voicemail. By morning, there was still no sign of him. They called the police to report him missing. At first, officers brushed it off. Brandon was an adult. Maybe he'd had too much to drink and wandered off to sleep it off somewhere. But his parents insisted Brandon wasn't the type to vanish. He wasn't reckless. Something was wrong. Eventually, the police began a search. But there was a major problem. Brandon wasn't anywhere near Lind. His abandoned Chevy Lumina was discovered the next day, over 20 miles away, in a ditch near Taunton, Minnesota. This revelation stunned everyone. Not only had Brandon misjudged his location, but he had also been walking in an area far more remote than originally believed. The terrain around Taunton was farmland, sprawling fields, tall grass, ditches, barbed wire fences, and deep, steep embankments leading to nearby creeks and rivers. Tracking dogs were brought in and picked up Brandon's scent. It led them from the car down a gravel road, across fields and fences, to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River, a dark, winding stream swollen from spring rain. The trail stopped abruptly at the water's edge. Searchers feared Brandon may have fallen in and drowned, possibly after the exclamation his father had heard on the phone. Dive teams scoured the river. They found nothing. Not Brandon. Not his phone. Not his glasses. Nothing. Further searches were conducted on foot, horseback, ATV, and even by helicopter. Volunteers combed miles of farmland. Water levels were monitored, and search teams returned year after year. But Brandon Swanson was gone, as though swallowed by the land itself. In the years following his disappearance, numerous theories have emerged. One suggests that Brandon did indeed fall into the river and drowned. Yet the lack of any physical evidence, no body, no personal effects, weakens that theory. Rivers often give up their secrets, but Brandon's remains have never surfaced. Another theory is that after crossing the river, he continued walking, possibly succumbing to hypothermia or injury somewhere in the vast farmland beyond the search perimeter. Some have speculated he may have collapsed into an old well, grain silo, or abandoned structure hidden by tall grass or overgrowth. But again, no evidence has ever been found. The most troubling theory is foul play. Could someone have been driving that isolated stretch of road at 2 a.m., come upon a stranded young man, and taken advantage of the situation? Brandon never sounded panicked on the phone, but it's possible he was being followed or threatened without his father realizing. His final exclamation, "OSH*T," could have signaled anything: a slip, an attack, a surprise. Despite the lack of answers, Brandon's disappearance had a lasting impact on Minnesota law. In 2009, the state passed Brandon's Law, which mandates that law enforcement must begin immediate investigations when an adult is reported missing under suspicious circumstances, especially when the individual's safety may be in danger, regardless of age. The law was a direct response to the delays and dismissals Brandon's parents faced when they first sought help. Today, Brandon's case remains open. His family continues to hope that one day, answers will come, even if they are painful. They still believe someone, somewhere, knows something. Perhaps a passing farmer, a late-night driver, or even someone who helped conceal the truth. Brandon Swanson would be in his mid-30s now. But in the minds of his parents, he's still 19, wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap, walking into the night, trying to get home. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sauter, Italian immigrants and proud parents of 10 children, had gathered in their cozy 2-story home to celebrate the holiday. The children were excited. 5 of them begged to stay up late to play with new toys. Jenny agreed, on the condition that they turn off the lights and lock the doors before bed. George and Jenny went upstairs around 10 p.m., carrying their youngest daughter, Sylvia, with them. Around 1 a.m., Jenny was awakened by a strange phone call. A woman's voice asked for someone Jenny didn't know, followed by awkward laughter and the clinking of glasses in the background. When Jenny told the caller they had the wrong number, the woman laughed again and hung up. Jenny noticed the lights were still on downstairs, the curtains open, unusual since the children had been told to take care of both. She assumed they'd forgotten and went back to bed. 30 minutes later, Jenny was awakened again, this time by a loud thud on the roof and a rolling sound. Moments later, smoke began to fill the house. A fire had started. She woke George, and they managed to rescue 4 of their children. But 5, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were nowhere to be found. George tried to re-enter the house, but the stairwell was already engulfed in flames. He attempted to reach the attic by climbing an exterior wall, but the ladder that always rested nearby was missing. He tried to move one of his trucks close to the house to climb atop it, but oddly, both of his vehicles, which had been working fine earlier that day, wouldn't start. Frantic, the family could only watch as the house burned to the ground in 45 minutes. When fire crews finally arrived, hours later due to understaffing from the holiday, there was nothing left but ashes. Initially, authorities declared the 5 children had perished in the fire. But no remains were found. No bones. No fragments. Not even teeth. The fire, they said, had been hot enough to completely cremate them. Yet Jenny, skeptical, began to conduct experiments, burning animal bones in their stove. She always found remnants. Even a local crematorium director told her that bones should have survived. The Sodders began to suspect that the fire had been set intentionally, and that their children had not died, but were kidnapped. That suspicion was fueled by several strange details. The missing ladder was later found down an embankment 75 feet away. A telephone repairman confirmed that someone had tampered with the house's phone line, cutting it, not the result of fire damage, as first thought. A witness reported seeing someone steal a block and tackle from George's property, possibly to sabotage the trucks. More chilling were the reported sightings. A bus driver claimed to have seen balls of fire thrown onto the Sodder roof, matching Jenny's memory of the strange thud. Another woman claimed to have seen the missing children watching the fire from a passing car. A waitress at a rest stop 50 miles away said she served breakfast to a group of children who matched their descriptions, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women of Italian appearance. Multiple tips poured in, none confirmed, all ignored by authorities. The Sodders began their own investigation. They distributed flyers, offered rewards, and in 1952, erected a billboard along Route 16, bearing the images of the 5 missing children and the haunting question, what was their fate? George traveled across the country chasing leads. One day, the family received an envelope with no return address, postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s who bore a striking resemblance to their missing son Louis. On the back were scrawled the words, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 90132 or 35. They hired a private detective to investigate the lead, but he vanished, never to be heard from again. The authorities continued to insist the children died in the fire. But no evidence was ever found. In fact, decades later, new forensic experts reviewed the case and supported the Sodders' belief that the fire had not burned hot enough, or long enough, to fully cremate 5 bodies. The Sodder home was rebuilt, but the family never truly moved on. The billboard remained standing into the 1980s. George passed away in 1969, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny died in 1989, still wearing black every day in mourning. Sylvia, the youngest, who was just 2 at the time of the fire, continued to seek the truth throughout her life. Even today, the case haunts the people of Fayetteville. Was it a tragic accident, or a carefully orchestrated abduction masked by arson? Was George targeted for his anti-Mussolini views, held by some in the local Italian immigrant community? Did someone exact revenge in the most devastating way imaginable? We may never know. The case of the missing Sodder children remains one of the most unsettling, unresolved family tragedies in American history. A mystery carved into ash and stone, into grieving hearts and billboard letters that once screamed at passing drivers. We are still looking for them.